Welcome back to another edition of Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. I am your host, Todd Rosales, folks, and it is so great to see you again. This is our second episode of the week. We're pumping out so many episodes left and right. It's been great to talk to all these amazing folks in the cannabis industry. I am fresh off 3 days at the Emerge Virtual Cannabis Conference as their MC. It was an absolute honor and a pleasure to host that event. Thank you to my good friend Charles Warner for taking care of me and asking me to be the MC, and to everybody else at Cannabis and Tech today. Thank you for making it an absolute incredible experience. I cannot wait for the next Emerge conference. Folks, you know we do it here at Cannabis Lab all the time. We have events going on throughout the month. We've got some awesome panels coming up. You can find those at joinclab.com. Of course, if you want to check out any of our interviews, those are always at youtube.com/elevateyourgrind. If you do enjoy the show, please like and subscribe, folks. That's how we keep going. That's how YouTube knows that we're popular. Just hit the like button, hit the subscribe. Make sure you follow us, because we're going to be bringing you so much great content for the rest of the year, especially leading up to 420 and beyond. And then stay tuned for some special things coming on over the summer. We're always dropping great episodes here at Elevate Your Grind. We don't need to talk about next. Okay, next week we've got two awesome people on the show. On the 6th and 7th, we'll be back on Tuesday and Wednesday with Cody Sanchez. She is a friend of the show and an all-time favorite guest. And then we have Jocelyn Sheltraw. Jocelyn, I am sorry if I butchered your last name. It is a tradition here at Elevate Your Grind, but she is from Headset, and I'm really excited to speak with her. But today's guest is somebody that I've wanted to have on the show for a while. So for those of you who have been with us since the beginning, you remember episodes 1 through 10, 12, 15. Yeah, the episodes where I was hesitant to talk about my own personal use of cannabis, but I very often mention getting away from THC percentages and the traditional way that cannabis is categorized. And constantly, I was mentioning something that was newer at the time, which is kind of industry standard now, but I called it the leafly kaleidoscope. Come to learn, it's actually called the leafly flower. And how many times did I mention getting somebody from Leafly on to explain it to us? Well, here to not only explain to us I might even try to lobby to tell them to call it the kaleidoscope. Probably not going to work. It looks like a flower. But here to explain the kaleidoscope and so much more about Leafly and her own personal journey is Laura Morarity. Laura, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and
messed up your name, Morarity. I told you I was going to do it, and I did it.
It's okay. It sounds like it's a tradition, so I'm glad I'm part of the club.
Oh, man. So I'm very excited to have you on the show. Like I said, this has been a long time coming for me. It's interesting as someone, a lot of us have been cannabis enthusiasts, cannabis advocates before a lot of these legal markets were around. And to me, Leafly has always been a staple of the cannabis culture. Wherever I was, for the first time when my plug would text me names of strains that I'd never heard of before when I was new to the game, I would go to Leafly and look them up. And I can't tell you how much I double down on it now. I dub you guys kind of the Wikipedia of weed. But at the end of the day, you really are this centralized hub of cannabis information and it's not just on the strains, it's on what's going on, it's on jobs and everything else. So how do we properly describe Leafly to people? Because to me, I think it's the Wikipedia of weed. It is a cannabis database for everything that you need to know. How do you guys describe it?
The thing about Leafly is Leafly has something for everybody in cannabis, because we have been here for a really long time, and we've taken it really seriously that an important part of our job is to educate people so we can get rid of the stigma around cannabis use and really empower people to make the right cannabis decisions in their lives. So what we are today is, in addition to the great news site and cannabis strains database that we're also a marketplace. So people also find their favorite new dispensaries near them and find the products they're looking for to place orders. So we're a marketplace that's really focused on education and helping people get to the right product at the right time for them. So that's really what Leafly is today.
Yeah, what I really love about the site, and we'll transition over to you in a second, but you've done a very good job of balancing information for the existing cannabis community as well as the newcomers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not easy to do. You look at, and I don't know, I might get some hate from saying this, but I feel like a lot of the OGs or a good amount, and some of the original people in this industry, they want to keep it close to the heart and it's their special thing, but they also want to share it with the world because they have a passion for the plant, and that's hard for them. So, everybody wants to bring people into the culture and into the way that they know it, but things are going to kind of shift as the general public comes in, and that's just natural. So how have you guys really taken that approach of balancing taking care of the people that have been around forever and have been fans of your site for the longest time versus all of these newcomers and, the young professionals and the soccer moms and the, I can call them elderly because we live in Florida and we have them here, but you know what I mean? How do you account for taking care of the core of the business plus all these newcomers?
Yeah, I think the big thing here is that if you really love the plant, you want other people to love the plant too. And so you try to encourage their love wherever they are in their journey. So, I don't know if you've ever spent time on Leafly's Instagram account, but that's one of those places that we post a lot of beautiful nug photography. And for people who aren't used to like being in the space, something about the nug is very intimidating for them. Sometimes it's just like, oh, this is what it looks like. I don't really think about this. But the people who have been in this space, they will take you out if you have a bad trim job on that Instagram account. And so it's like, how do you find ways to bring everybody along in that journey? Like how they see it. So make sure that people who are new to this see the beauty of that flower and that nug just the same way as the people who've been in this for a long time. So we just try to look at all subjects from a variety of different angles. So right now, we just kicked off our celebration for the 50th anniversary of 420, which is this year. And we're doing it by tracing the genealogies of all of the strain families, which sounds like super deep and nerdy, which we are kind of nerdy. So that's what we're about. But we're able to get deep enough into those stories that we're able to really show things that people who've been in this industry for a long time are learning new things, and that people who are new to this space take something away where they might be able to make a better shopping decision right now. So like right now we're exploring the Hayes family, and we'll go through additional families, but whether you've been in this for a long time and you want to get really deep into the history, or you're just like, okay, what strain should I try in the Hayes family? We just try to hit both sides. So for us, it's a constant balancing act of figuring out how's this going to work? How do we make sure, we have something for everybody? But it is a dance, and it takes having a lot of subject matter experts at our disposal.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's funny. You probably keep seeing me looking over to my right, which is where my computer is. And I actually noticed that you all, and I lied. I said, we're going to get into you in a second, but you've led me down the rabbit hole here.
I'm here. I'm here to go down rabbit holes.
I'm looking at the families, the families of cultivars and everything else that you guys have put on the website. Hey, that's awesome. I didn't know that this was special, for 420, because I started looking, and I've been in the industry now for 2.5 years. I'm with the pandemic, who knows how long a time that is. I honestly, sometimes I feel like it was like we're in Avengers Endgame and we just got back from the snap. Probably a horrible comparison. We might get canceled for that. But, I look, and I had one of the ones I happened to notice was the Tangy family. And I'm like, I love Tangy. It's one of my favorite sativas, and we can get into indica versus sativa in a second. And I know that's a favorite conversation of those. But then I look in and I see Mimosa in there. I'm like, that's another one of my favorite strains. And I kind of knew that they were related. And then, you go down, and I'm describing your website that you know very well to you. But for everyone who we can't share the screen with, you see the kaleidoscope, you see, between calming and energetic, where it sits on the spectrum. You see kind of crowdsourced effects, which to me is where I typically will go to first to see if I like a strain, because I think we all know how we like to feel when we consume it, but we're all trying to figure out and reverse engineer what makes us feel that way. And then to your point, I go all the way below the comments, and I see the mimosa comes from purple punch and clementine to form mimosa, and then it has a child strain underneath it. And I'm like, I didn't even know I wanted to know that. And I do. So that's something I've got to ask you. Are you getting a lot of requests for this information, or are you guys just looking into this stuff and you're like, that's cool, I bet people would love it, and putting it out on the site?
It's a little bit of both. Sometimes people really want to ask those questions. And sometimes, I work with a group of people who just live to do this kind of work and dig into this information. And it's so fascinating to figure out what strains work for you and what strains don't. And when you play with them enough, you start to see really interesting trends, which is one of the reasons the leafly flower and the color system we have is because we can't say what your individual perfect effect is or how a strain is going to affect you individually. But we do want to make color associations, right? So if for instance, for me, I work really well with myrcene and caryophyllene dominant strains. Those are the ones that are best for me. Those are the blues and kind of the magentas on our site. I want to gnaw my arm off anytime I hit an orange. So I avoid, the haze family is not always that good to me. So I tend to not go for those super terpinolene dominant strains. But I can make that color association. I don't have to, as a consumer, I know that because I spend a lot of time at Leafly. But if I'm just a consumer who's gone through and said, man, I've liked a few of these strains that have a purple diamond next to them, then I'm probably going to like other ones that have a purple diamond next to them. So we tend to take a look at that. And as you start to see those trends, you start to see those next layers of where you can dig into and figure out the next story. But, I would say this is a passion project in a lot of ways for our team. There have been growers and breeders who have asked us, when we're going to dig into some of these subjects. But we'll dig into this as much as we'll dig into, does white ash mean good weed? That's something that we tackled this week. And that's something that our social community has been asking us for a long time. So we do a little bit of both, what's the science showing us and what do people want to hear?
So first of all, that is one of the most informative, educated ways I've ever heard someone talk about the type of weed that they like to consume. And I want to get to that level. I really do. That's where I am right now. I know what I like. I know what I like to feel. I kind of know a few strains that make me feel that way. And I can tell you, I wish I started this after the podcast because I'm itching to just look here and dig through and start doing my research. But I want to get to that level of education. And I think what Leafly is doing for our industry, what a lot of people aren't, is you're giving people, the average folk who are not in the grows, that are not dealing with the plants, that are not selling with it every day, you give the consumers a chance to educate themselves to the level of someone who's like a wine connoisseur, right? When we hear people who are really into wine, we hear them talk about the notes and the body and all these different things. And people get very educated. I mean, look at Mr. Wonderful on Shark Tank and how much he talks about wine right there. Imagine seeing people like that aren't in the industry, that aren't growers, that aren't cultivators, that have that level of knowledge. And I think that's what's really, actually, I know that's what's going to mainstream weed, which I imagine is a big goal of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, mainstreaming is really important, but I kind of like to think of it, and I hate comparing cannabis to alcohol because, cannabis is medicine for so many people.
Yeah.
And so I don't like to use this analogy, but it's a really kind of clear, direct analogy that I think can be helpful. A lot of people know they like red wine, white wine, or rosé, right? And that's fine. But then once you really start to understand, I like red wines, maybe you find out you like a Pinot Noir or a Merlot, or you like a Cab Sauv, or you pick something in that space that you really like in there. And I think that's what you're starting to see in cannabis happening too, right? So you had indica sativa hybrid, and there were people who were like, I'm pretty sure I like sativas. I'm pretty sure I liked indicas, or yeah, I like some of these hybrids and in the middle. But now you're starting to see, okay, yeah, I like the indicas, but I think it's really these myrcene dominant indicas that I really like. Or I didn't like sativas, but if it has this combination profile, I like it a little more. So I would have told you before I started at Leafly and before I started really learning this, that I like indicas. I just like indicas. That's what I like. That's not actually true. What's actually true is that I like, if it's going to be high THC, I do prefer myrcene dominant, caryophyllene dominant things that are probably indica leaning. But one of my favorite strains that is not psychoactive is Dance Hall, which is a sativa, but also myrcene. So that's one of those strains that I can have pretty much any time, and it works really well for me, even though it's not kind of in the traditional area. So it's that mix of like, how does the cannabinoid content work with the terpenes, work with the percentages, and you start to find out those places that work for you. And it really is experimentation. There is no magic bullet to figure out like how to do this, but you start finding those cues, and having information at your fingertips is really important. Talking to your bud tender, they love to talk about these. There's nothing better than an amazing bud tender who is passionate about the plant and who you can feel confident in saying, this got me too high, but I liked this effect. And then being able to say, well, why don't we pick one that has more CBD in it? Let's like work on that ratio, and let's try to keep the same profile. And so like big hats off to all of the amazing retailers who spend so much time like educating their teams to like take that information that people read on the internet and then like really make it practical with some plants sitting in front of them to help them make a purchase decision.
That is great. I mean, it's amazing how deep that you can talk about this plant and what you like and what you prefer, down to the terpenes and how everything interacts together. 4 years ago, you weren't in this business, and you're able to have conversations, what I think are you're able to talk more informative and more educated than a lot of people that I know in this space, especially one podcast host who has 130 something episodes, who I'm trying to get to your level of knowledge. 4 years ago, you worked for another amazing company that does wireless speakers.
Right.
But what turned your attention to this industry? Was it a passion of yours? Was it the opportunity? Was it, the ability to educate people? What brought you to Leafly?
Well, I've always had a really strong love and affinity for mission-driven companies that really have a strong purpose in the world. And not in my last job where I worked at Sonos, peddling wonderful speakers and had a great time. But before that, I worked at a legal marketplace, and which doesn't sound very glamorous at all. But when you spend any time working in the access to justice space, you quickly realize just how much racist bullshit the war on drugs is, right? Mm-hmm. And so when a job description came across my desk while I was at Sonos that said part of your job is to help end the federal prohibition of marijuana in the United States, that was a compelling mission for me that I wanted to be part of. And, I was somebody who had used cannabis. I wasn't afraid of it. I didn't feel the stigma of that for my own life. But I think all of us who come into this industry from somewhere else, I think we have to have a moment where we realize, yeah, we're naive. Like, we're naive to the depth of magic in the plant. We're naive to the challenges that this industry faces. We're naive to the equity challenges we have to overcome as we're trying to make the industry that we want and want to see in the world. And so for me, it's been an incredible journey. And I feel like you learn at warp speed if you want to be successful here. And I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to do that at Leafly with just brilliant people around me, and really supportive, audience of consumers and retailers and brands who really believe in what Leafly's trying to do.
That's such a great thing to be able to say. When I saw an opportunity to help end the war on drugs come across my desk, I had to jump on it. I mean, it just shows you how passionate you are about the industry. I have to say, and I don't know if it's just everybody out in the West Coast or what it is, but you had mentioned that, the stigma never really affected your life. Can you explain to us why? Is it being on the West Coast? Was it just around your family? Was it around your friends? Because like I said, just over a year ago, here I am on a cannabis online network with a cannabis podcast, talking to guests in the cannabis industry, afraid to say that I like to smoke joints. And because I'm in Florida, I'm on the East Coast, and I grew up as a dare kid, right? So talk to me, because I get jealous of people like you that I don't want to say you didn't deal with it, but it didn't bother you as much.
Yeah, I think part of it is, living in Seattle. I live in one of the first states to recreationally legalize, right? And so I have the benefit of seeing years of innovation in this industry in front of me and seeing, we had very progressive local government leaders here in Seattle who got ahead of this early and saw a way forward. Now, like, don't get me wrong, in Washington State, we still don't have home grow. There are a lot of issues here in Washington State, but it did make it easier to just for cannabis to come back into my life in just a very seamless way. So I think that's important. I was raised in Kentucky, so I'm actually was born and raised in Kentucky, and my parents have always been pretty great and laid back. And in my teenage years, and my college years, cannabis was part of my experience. And I was very fortunate in that, that was not something that caused repercussions for me and not something that I really thought about much. And I didn't see it as like a potential barrier to my success, which is something that is clearly a place of privilege that I have that a lot of people don't have. And so, yeah, I think for me, that's important. I was a dare kid too, thanks Nancy Reagan. So I had all of those pieces too. And I think one of the cool things that's, happening in cannabis right now is you're seeing a whole generation of people turning 21 who were not raised under the same stigma. They came of age during a time when, now we're at 17, almost 18 states have legalized, fully legalized cannabis, right? And so they're coming of age where it's normal to have this as part of your life. And so we're going to see those early adopters really shaping the points of view of people in my generation, people older than me, who, maybe have some weird hangups because of where we've been.
Yeah, it's really interesting to talk to people just in general because so many differentiating levels of education on cannabis, and I mean this not in a very derogatory way, but it's different levels of ignorance, right?
Yeah.
And I don't mean ignorance as in they're all assholes. I mean ignorance as in they're ignoring the actual information, the actual definition of the word, which it doesn't get used that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because even my mother, and she's going to call me out for just calling out all her cannabis use on this show, but when she talks to me about things, I give her some stuff to help her sleep, and she's like, "Oh, well, I had a drink, so I don't want to take that." I go, "Ma, these aren't opiates. Like it's okay. Like it might affect you a little bit, but there really isn't a huge bit of interaction. It's not like you're taking Vicodin or something else like that, and then you're having a drink and you're going to have a very bad reaction." So it's interesting to have to re-educate people off that DARE education, off the war on drugs education, and show them like, hey, what you think of cannabis consumers is a stereotype, for lack of a better word, right? Not everybody smokes a full joint every time they sit down. Not everybody smokes to consume. Not everybody, a lot of people microdose. A lot of people use it therapeutically. They use it medicinally, nutraceutically. There's so many different ways to use it. There's so many different pieces of the industry. And I've said it 10 times out of 10 on this show, lazy stoners it's not the cannabis that's making them lazy. They're lazy people who happen to smoke weed too. I can tell you, and I love calling him out. My good friend Anthony was the person who single-handedly broke the stigma for me because he smoked more than anybody else that I knew. I remember he'd sleep over my house when he'd be in town. First of all, he woke up before me, so he was more productive than me. 6:40 in the morning, I'd wake up in my house. Okay, Anthony's up. I can smell it. But he was not only did he smoke more than anybody else, but he was also smarter than everybody else. And he was articulate enough to explain complex concepts to people. And he's one of the hardest workers that I had ever seen. He worked harder than any of us, right? And when I look at someone like that, who to me gave me my education and my view into the cannabis world, I'm like, no, this lazy stoner thing doesn't exist because look at him. And there's got to be a lot more people like him, which is why I started this show. And, you and I are having this conversation. You have a very high level position at your company in the cannabis industry. You've got to be doing something right. I don't imagine that you're very lazy.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider myself lazy except when I choose to relax and be lazy. Um, but yeah, I think that is one of the great stereotypes that you hear. Another stereotype that I think we really need to work on is around the smell. I was working with a marketing strategist and they made a comment about like the smell. And I was like, do you dislike the smell of cannabis or do you dislike what you associate with the smell of cannabis that you have been socialized to believe? And I
Yeah.
was like, let's unpack that a little bit. And so as we dug into it, it was really those associations of these are people who aren't very smart, they're criminals, they're people who are lazy, all of those stereotypes that a lot of us have been imprinted on us, people have come to associate with a smell. And I think cannabis smells great. I think some of it smells better than others, but that's how it works, right? So, but again, like that was also something that I had to question in myself. And I think as you see more and more people questioning these really specific stereotypes that they have, I think the better we're going to be.
No, you're 100% right. I mean, it's all about re-education and getting people to understand it. And, I know you said you don't like comparing cannabis to alcohol, but at the end of the day, what everybody's doing to cannabis consumers is saying, oh, you drink, well, you're an alcoholic, right?
Yeah, right.
Because they're just generalizing. I really have to dance around these topics. We'll say in the grand scheme of people who consume alcohol,
Mhm.
alcoholics are the worst of them, right? I think that's a fair
Right,
statement. So
right.
to say someone who smokes cannabis or smokes weed, let's call it what it is that lazy stoner, is to say anybody who has a glass of wine is an alcoholic. And I think that's what we're trying to unpack and peel back the layers of is like,
Mhm.
yeah, there are some people who take it too far. We recognize that, but it's not all of us. And it's certainly not the majority. So it's fun to have these conversations. Honestly, I really like challenging people and understanding their level of education. And it's funny. I had this conversation, I think, with my guest on Tuesday with Gia Marone. And I said, it's funny, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, when I got into the industry, I would hide what I did because I was scared to talk about it because of the stigma. I'm no longer worried about that, but now I hide what I do because people talk my freaking ear off when they find out I'm in cannabis and ask me a million questions. And here I am having these conversations 2-3 times a week. And I'm like, I got to do a personal podcast for you. Here's my YouTube, man. Just go take a look at it. Do you find that too? Like it's gone from, oh, you're in cannabis, that's bad, to, oh, you're in cannabis. What do you think about this? Have you heard of this? Do you have been to this place? Do people just like lock you in the corner at a party and try to talk your ear off?
It's been so long since I got to go to a real party. I look forward to those again.
Wait, good point.
But I will say, you do get a lot of questions, and you know, a lot of the questions, especially on people who are really just trying to understand. I love answering those questions because you find that in those conversations, I'm sure you've experienced it. You have that unlock moment with them where they realize like they've been thinking about this thing the wrong way, or they just made a giant assumption about what it means to smoke cannabis. One of my favorite assumption is weed is weed. Like there are
Oh,
so many people who are new to this who don't understand just like the wonderful variety and diversity of what's possible with this plant. Not even just from like that there's more than one type of flower, that there's a different types of highs, but that there are all these incredible form factors that that we can get cannabis in. And here in Washington, since we're a very mature state, like it feels endless, like the possibilities on how you can use cannabis. So that's really one of my favorite parts of those conversations. I do often tell people, I do get the question, well, do you smoke weed? And I'm like, yeah, I do. And I hope that someday, like, it's as weird to ask somebody, did you have, a joint last night, as it is, did you have a glass of wine with dinner, right? Like, if one shouldn't be so taboo,
yeah.
because in a lot of cases, um, the in my case in particular, I'd say that there are times where I'd rather pick up some cannabis than pick up a glass of wine, because I'm going to feel a lot better after the cannabis than I am after a glass or two of wine.
No,
So,
you
different ways to do it.
you're 100% right. I mean, I have converted more so to cannabis than alcohol. I felt better. You don't have those mornings where you're kind of done for the day, right? You know,
Yeah.
as we get older in life, in our early 20s and everything else, you can go out, you can drink all night, you maybe lose a half a day of your life, but every year after 21, like that's an extra 10 minutes that you're dead that next day. You know,
Yeah.
I'm at the point in time, if I have a few drinks, like Sunday's gone, it's off the table.
Yeah.
So, you know, cannabis is definitely a great replacement for that. Crap, I had another thought that I want to go to after this. I forgot it because you made really good points. That tends to happen with me. Regardless, let's circle back and it'll come back to me. So looking at what you guys have done on Leafly, you had mentioned
Mhm.
something really interesting. You know, you're in a mature market, and oh crap, I know what I want to talk about. So back to your point about asking about do you smoke it? And so I got a physical the other day, and I like to be
Uh-huh.
very honest with my doctor. I like to let them
Yep.
know what's going into my body, because why
Yep.
would I hide that? And they
Right.
asked me if I smoke, and I said I am a medical cannabis patient. The reason I said that is because the last time I told the doctor I smoked, they said that I used illicit drugs, and I wanted to tell them to go F themselves because I'm a patient. So I said it that way, and it was the most enlightening thing where my doctor's like, all right, cool. What do you use it for? And I told her, and she's like, all right, cool. I'm like, is that good? She's like, does it work for you? I'm like, yeah. She's like, great. She's like, how do you do it? I go, well, I usually smoke, a joint a night. And she's like, all right, I would say continue using the cannabis, continue using the weed, but maybe wean yourself off smoking it. I'm like, okay, why? She's like, listen, it is 100 times better than smoking cigarettes, but you're still putting smoke into your lungs and there's still heat damage. So just over time, try to scale back on the smoking, but keep using the cannabis however you're using it as long as you enjoy it. I'm like, you know, and it's not a cannabis doctor, an actual
Yeah.
practicing physician. And it was so enlightening and so enjoyable to have that conversation with my medical professional. Like, I can't wait till other people do that, until that doctor, if I can't wait till the conversation gets brought up naturally, where it's like, doc, I'm feeling anxiety. I'm super stressed. Like, nothing takes my attention off of it. It's really clouding my days. It's affecting my relationships in life. And someone's like, well, have you tried cannabis? Right. And have
Mhm.
a real doctor recommend it. How far you're in a much more mature state than I am. I'm in Florida. How far are we away from those conversations, or are they
Oh,
happening where you are?
I think it really depends on like the practitioner, honestly. I think even here in Washington, it's really hard to find and understand what doctors are going to be able to have an informed conversation about cannabis use with you. And I know that there are a lot of, associations cropping up. I think one based out of Florida in particular, the American Medical Marijuana Physicians Association, that's trying to do like a lot of work to educate doctors and physicians to help them give better counsel on that. I will say, it's been a long time since I've had any, like, a Dr. Blink and I had a discussion about cannabis use with me. I one of the primary reasons that I use cannabis is because I'm a mom. I have a high profile job. I'm living through a pandemic. There are plenty of reasons, but I have trouble turning my brain off to go to sleep at night. And I would go through just crazy rounds of insomnia and then sleep too much. And for me, cannabis products help with that, and better than any over-the-counter or prescription sleep aid ever helped. And I feel great when I wake up in the morning. I can still go work out and do everything that I want to do. So when I have that conversation with my doctor, they're like, great, I'm glad that works for you. But I also get the combustion message. So I've moved on pretty much to flower vaporizing myself. So I don't do, full combustion anymore, but it works for me pretty well.
I still do full combustion because I have a hard time taking advice, but I will try to wean myself off of it. It's just, luckily I found cannabis before cigarettes. I think there is something
Yeah.
therapeutic about smoking, but I understand where the doc's coming from. I'm definitely gonna have to pick your brain a little bit after the cameras turn off, because it seems like we have very similar taste in cannabis. Right.
Yeah.
And because I started for the same reasons, and I am a sativa fan and I like a lot of the uplifting things. So I'm definitely going to pick your brain. Another thing you had mentioned in your, what your response there is, you mentioned being a mom, right?
Hmm.
So I have oh crap, how old is she now? My wife may be watching. 17-month-old daughter. I have another one coming on the way. And, at some point, luckily I've got time, but I'm going to have the conversation about what dad does for a living and what
Yeah.
dad consumes and what this is about. I don't know how old your kids are, but have you had that conversation? And this is something I think is real good advice for anybody watching. How do we have, not only with our own kids, but with the youth of America, how do we start having this conversation? Because there is one thing that I see a lot of people bring up in discussion that I agree with, is at what age is it safe to start using it regularly? Because there are developmental issues in the brain and everything else. I'm not nearly educated enough to have that conversation. So you don't need to answer that second part, but how do you approach the conversation with your children? How did you do it personally, if you have?
Yeah. So I have a 9-year-old son. And so, he's very inquisitive. He knows what mom does for a living. And I would say my son Miles is probably more educated about cannabis at this point than a lot of adults are. He understands that it's a plant and people use it for medicine or to relax. And then it comes in a variety of form factors. And if you see it, you don't touch it because it could hurt his developing brain.
Ooh.
And his brain is his most important asset. And so that is what we talk about, and how we talk about it. And so, he knows what my cannabis products look like. I don't like go out of my way to hide them in like a locked place where it's a secret on what they are. I'm pretty open about like what they are and what they look like. So, that's the conversation we have. And at Leafly, we were actually, before, we closed the offices and everybody was working from home, we're a very family friendly company. So, my son would come to work with me sometimes. And so he's at Leafly, we're all talking cannabis. There's like a 4-foot bong in the office. And so, we have those conversations. To him, it's a very normal thing. He tells me he's going to finish up being an engineer so he can come and commute to work with me every day. So for us, it's just become something we talk about regularly, and it's as easy a conversation as the alcohol conversation for us.
Very cool. So will you have that conversation with my daughter now?
Oh, I think you've got it covered.
Very cool. Yeah, no, I know I'm going to have to do that, but I love talking to people about it because it's interesting how everybody approaches it. And it's very similar. It's being honest with them, right?
Yeah.
I want to circle all the way back to the website because, I think what you guys are doing is excellent. So we talk about things like indica versus sativa, and, it's a religious
Mhm.
battle at this point because realistically, these things have been crossbred so many times that they're all hybrids, right?
Yep. Right.
A lot of people are saying that it's time to leave that naming convention. My question is, although they are not scientifically accurate anymore, they describe the general feeling that that particular strain makes you feel, whether it's more uplifted and energetic or more relaxed and kind of, a little bit more tired. Is it okay? And are you guys talking about keeping those naming conventions just because it kind of describes the general feeling? Or are we really going to start to move away from indica sativa because it's not scientifically accurate?
They're always going to have a role in our industry because, that's really important for growers, right? Like it's a lot faster to grow a lot of the indica plants than it is some of these sativas that take 10, 11, 12 weeks to grow, right? So, when you think about like what we're talking about right now at Leafly, these Hayes family strains, they were super, super popular. And now there are still, of course, quite a few that are still around, but you don't see them grown as often because of the growing cycles, and a lot of the larger producers like want to turn over crops at a faster rate, which links them to different types of plants. So, we're always going to see sativa and indica around. I think they are like a good first cut, kind of in that, do you like white wine? Do you like red wine? But then, most people can go a little deeper than that, right? So I don't think it's ever going to totally go away, but what we have to do is really start bridging people to those additional factors they want to take in. So, okay, so you kind of like indicas. All right. How do you do with the different types of cannabinoid content? Does really high THC, do you want really high THC because people told you that's what a fire strain is? Or do you actually know that works for you? And maybe we can find out that maybe it's not necessarily high THC that's the thing for you, but maybe there's a balance. So you look at the cannabinoids and then you really start to dig into those terpene profiles that really work for you. So we view it as it's an important step in the journey. It's really important for growers, and it's an important, way to get people started. And as we bridge them to some of these other more complex concepts, that some people are going to go on that journey and some people aren't. And we need to do our best to make sure people get the best products they can, regardless of how far they want to go in learning that information.
But I think you do a very good job with that, because when I look at the site and I look at the strains, I feel like you've broken it down several different ways for anybody at any education level to understand, right? If you're a connoisseur, you're going to look at, and I'm not calling it what you want me to, you're going to look at the kaleidoscope and you're going to check that out and look at the terpenes and everything else, and look at the diamonds versus the circles and the color. And maybe you'll get to the colors too. Whereas if you're not, you're just going to go, well, how do people say that it makes them feel? And I'm just going to go off that, because I'm just going to go off crowdsourcing. So I think you have something at every level for people, but I want people to start understanding, yes, the flower, the kaleidoscope more. Can you explain the breakdown? How do we read that so we can better understand it, if you're able to explain it?
Yeah. So one of the favorite descriptions, by the way, that somebody once described it as is the sacred geometry, which was like my favorite. So the kaleidoscope, the flower, the sacred geometry, that is the shape that you see. It's actually a really pretty simple system. So diamonds are THC, circles are CBD. You'll also occasionally see triangles for CBG. You'll particularly see that in some of your strains that have orange in them. So your terpinolene focused strains. So those are the first two things you need to know: diamonds, circles. The pointier the diamond, the more THC it has. So if you look at, for instance, a strain like Harlequin, which is a pretty CBD dominant strain, you're still going to have THC in that strain, but the diamonds are going to look more like squares. And that tells you, like, if it's got the circle in the middle, that means it's CBD dominant. But if it has those squares, there's a little THC in there too. It's a THC dominant strain if it has a diamond in the middle. And some of those diamonds get really long and sharp looking. And those are your really high THC strains. So that's what to think about as the strain or the shape. You often will see the triangles, if they're CBG, as like a secondary shape in there. So then in the middle, you'll also see a color. So we divide up into, a handful of primary terpenes that we really focus on. I think we have a total of 12 different colors for terpenes in there. But the most common, of course, are myrcene, which is blue, caryophyllene, which is a magenta color. You have pinene, which is a green. You have limonene in yellow, and terpinolene in orange. And that covers a big group. But you'll see the secondary colors like osamines and linolules and different colors that also pop up in your strain. So Leafly strain of the year in 2020 was Runts. That tends to be on average, although it does vary sometime regionally, a limonene dominant strain with some myrcene and linalool in it. So you'll see, and it's a high THC. So you'll see a yellow diamond with the secondary terpene colors being the purple for the linalool and the blue for the myrcene. So that's kind of what you can expect when you see the Leafly flower. What you'll start to see on a lot of our pages is to make the shorthand easier, because it is important. We have this philosophy at Leafly of let me dig, don't make me dig for information. You'll often see that we'll just have the diamond that's the center profile on a picture of the nug. So you'll have a nug shot with that center primary terpene. So it'll make it easier at a glance if you're like, oh, I love caryophyllene. In my case, that is true. And then you can kind of look from there and see what works for you.
So first of all,
so that's
sorry.
That's the go ahead.
No, I'm saying I keep you keep explaining and I keep looking at what it is right here. So I feel bad because I know you're talking and looking at the side of my head. But thank you for explaining that, because that makes it very easy to read and to educate ourselves. And like I said, I want to get to the level that you are where I can not even talk about things this way, but at least be able to scroll through your site and recognize okay, these are the strains that I should be looking for. Because I think a lot of us, there's a lot of excitement with trying new products and trying new strains and exploring. And I can tell you, whenever the dispensaries in Florida drop new strains, I got to try that. But at the end of the day, I really do know what I like, and I should be focusing on that more, because I can't tell you how many times I've had a strain. And I won't say it's bad, but I'm like, that was just not my thing. Right. You know, it's not my flavor of red or whatever it is. So I need to get better about knowing what I like when new strains are coming out. And just because it's the new strain that everyone's going to buy, it's that doesn't have the things they want in it. So I think a lot of people should get there, but it's got to be getting so much harder to do this now that you have so many different states with legalization, medical rec, and then so many new breeds and cultivars coming out, and so many people crossbreeding everything, and then getting away from standard naming conventions. Whereas someone might have a blue dream strain, but they don't call it that anymore. And then other people are calling things different. So how do you guys kind of deal with that internally? Do we go for the most popular stuff, or is it just we're going to try to do as much as we can as quickly as we can?
You know, it's just a fine line, because the pace of innovation is just amazing and incredible in our industry. And there are definitely regional trends too. So we have to really pay attention to what's going on. So right now there are over 5,000 strains and new strains being added weekly into the Leafly database. And, you know, the way we prioritize them is, yes, we have an email address where people can email if there's a new strain that we should get in there. But we also look for, what are people searching for? What are people being told? And so we kind of look at you know, on the East Coast and in the Midwest, Brownie Scout is really popular. That's not something we see a whole lot on the West Coast, but a lot of people are searching for it. So, you know, that's a strain that we make sure that we have in our database that people can start reviewing quickly. And we start working with labs around the country to get the data so we can start to get those terpene profiles. I think the real place where this is going to get dynamic and super interesting over time is as there's more lab data available to analyze these things, you will start to see those regional variations in the way you see wine, where Runts in Washington is limonene dominant, but maybe Runts in California, where Runts came from originally, is more caryophyllene dominant. And there might be a slight difference in what happens. Because right now, you know, a lot of these strains are kind of the larger average across of on average, this is what the strain's profile is. But to your point, there are nuances to that. And you can look at a dozen blue dreams, and you know, 20 of those are going to be myrcene dominant with pinene as a secondary terpene. But there's going to be one that's a pinene dominant, and something that's happened where that's grown, something about the earth it was grown in, and the person who grew it is going to flip that profile and make it just slightly unique and special. And so over time, I think we're really going to be able to show what makes people special. And the final thing I'd say on that is there are a lot of people who are like, why are you sharing all this information? It's too complicated. People just want to know how it makes them feel. And like, yes, there are some people who are only going to want to know that, and that is great. And we want to serve them and we want to make sure their experience is easy. But there is so much magic in this plant. And I am very excited for the day when there's enough data out there where the brilliant growers and breeders out there can go out there and craft unique terpene profiles because of things that aren't on the market. That's why so many people love pink lemonade. It's one of the rare ocimene dominant strains that you can find. It's one of those rare things you kind of go out and chase. And I think this level of understanding creates that opportunity to really explore the wealth of what's out there.
I think I disagree with whoever said that, because when I look at your site, I think it's how much do you want to educate yourself, right? That you're putting
Right.
all the information there, but you categorize it in such a way where you don't have to go through it if you don't want to. It's very easy for your eye to catch what you're looking for, find it, read it, and move on. And then for some people who may not even know that, like when I came across the strain genetics, and I'm like, I didn't even know that I wanted to know the strange, but now I do. And now I'm going to go scour the site for more of it, right?
Right.
So I think you give people the option to discover the information that they want to learn. And that's what I really like about it. I think, for Leafly, and I speak very highly of you guys because you've been around forever. It's been very, it's been very important to me, and it's educated me a lot, as well as helping other people understand the cannabis that they smoke and what they're looking for or what they're getting. Right. And, it's interesting just how deep you can go with this. Crap, I lost another thought. I'm just 2 for 2 right here. Um, I don't think this was that thought, but we look at the different strains that are available, and I heard you talk about this on another interview that you did, that people right now, we're at a place where there's no brand affinity, but they have strain affinity, right?
Mhm.
And we look at all the different options out there, and although you might have strain affinity, you had just mentioned it, it may not be homogenous across all the brands, all the regions, or even within the same region across different cultivators, right? So when do we get to this inflection point where it truly turns into more of a CPG industry and we have more brand affinity than strain affinity? When people are like, obviously a lot of people are big on what Cookies puts out right now, but when when we have a Cookies in other states, or we have multiple Cookies where people are like, no, they put out the best, or they put out the best, and it's consistent across the country.
I mean, I think that's going to be a really exciting time, right? Like,
Oh
think
yeah.
about like all of the innovation that comes out of Cookies. There's a reason why they're a beloved brand, because they consistently demonstrate innovation, and they put it out in a way that people are excited about. And I think that's the heart of the brand. Like, they make a promise that they're creating great weed that's going to be different than what you can get anywhere else, and they deliver on that to their customers. And I think as more and more companies find their specific niche, I think we are going to see brands kind of rise, and I think it's going to vary by market, and as we all start to understand who our customer is, understand what they really want, I think you're going to see more and more people and more brands carve out kind of that sweet spot for themselves, which I think is going to be really exciting. One of my favorite brands here in Washington State is an extracts brand called Halo. It's a women-owned brand, and they really doubled down on like showing their lab test results. They have a Spotify playlist with every single different cartridge they put out. It's just a great brand. They partner locally. They're beloved locally because of that. And I think we'll start to see more and more of people finding their voice, and get out of this kind of, frankly, we're just, so many businesses right now are in that rush to try to navigate the regulations and survive and get the next product out the door. I think we've still got a lot of growing up to do as consumers, so we can support brands as brands. But I think we're going to get there quickly.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited about the future of this. Like down here in Florida, we mostly have the MSOs, but there's one truly family-owned company, and it's hard for me not to support them when I go down there. They're at a homestead, and when I hear about the dad's story about holding a mattress over his family during Hurricane Andrew, it's like, how do I not support you? How do I not buy
Right.
from you, right? Um, you mentioned extracts and other things. You're very strained education on Leafly. Do you get to a point where you're going to start focusing on products where we have, effects might feel different when it's concentrated, or now we see things such as tinctures and beverages and
Mm,
edibles, and
yeah.
some of them are strain specific, some aren't. I don't know if it's on there already. I haven't enough time to scour, but are we also putting reviews for specific products that may not be strain specific, or is that a future thing for you?
We do have that available. It's not used quite as much as strains, and part of that too is just the volatility in products that are available. It depends. You don't necessarily know the thing you're going to review is going. It's just not quite the stability, I would say, in the catalog. It's just always quite constantly changing. We do spend a lot of time trying to educate people, especially every July, right around the time Oil Day comes. We really work to educate people on the different types of extracts, and there are so many different types of extracts, and there's a lot of amazing innovation happening in that space. So helping people get a little less intimidated, because I think people are more intimidated by extracts, or they think they're intimidated by extracts. Although people love a good vape cartridge, they don't understand that oil is an extract.
Yeah.
So there's that piece. I think, some people think that edibles are the only thing that work for them, or they hate edibles. I personally don't think my body metabolizes THC in edibles as well as it does in other form factors. So I don't like it. But I know people who love it, and going low and slow is a really important part of that. So we spend a lot of education, not so much on what are the effects you're going to get from an edible, but how to dose. That's really, I feel like, the questions we get a lot are how much should I take in an edible or in a tincture or other formats? And that, I think that's a big question that people have that we regularly answer on our site.
I mean, it's a good one to answer, and I'm glad that there is a database for people to kind of help them with their first or their early experiences. And
Yeah.
then the last thing I want to ask about the platform, I just recently watched that documentary, The Last Blockbuster, and if anybody
Oh,
hasn't seen it,
yeah.
it's really interesting. It's literally on the last Blockbuster in the United States, but it brings you back to a time where Blockbuster was big in our lives. And one of the interesting things that you used to see at video rental stores that I think would be really cool on your site, especially in a time where we have so many influencers and people that follow, is like Laura's picks, if you will,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Where there
Yeah.
are people at Leafly, and I don't know if you guys are doing this, but where there are people at Leafly and you guys just kind of have a list of your favorite strains where it's like, I have a very similar, taste profile to you. So I'm going to follow the strains that you like. And as you discover new ones, I'm going to try them too. Like I'm going back to that section in Blockbuster, like Dave's picks, Sarah's picks, whatsoever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
does that exist, or is that a project for you guys? Because I think that'd
I
be awesome.
I think that would be awesome. We do it a little bit editorially. So, every year we do at least like what are Leafly staff picks on best strains of 2020. We'll do, every month we do something called the Leafly Buzz. And it really does lean very heavily West Coast, although we're getting ready to expand that a little bit more. But it leans into like, what are the hot new strains that everybody's loving right now from different folks on the West Coast. And so we found like people really like that. And we'll say like what strains are trending up in our database. So like I think last month it was Oreos with a Z, is like a trending strain that we're seeing like a lot more people are looking for right now. And we find people really like that data, but I love the idea of not just being able to follow Leafly staff, but being able to follow your friends and see what they're smoking and how they're rating it.
I need to own 1% of that idea if you guys take it.
All right.
All right, we're good. At least let me volunteer to be one of the first influencers.
There we go. There we go.
Perfect. So listen, we've talked about how great the website is for about an hour now, and it really is. You guys have built a phenomenal community. It's a phenomenal resource for anybody in the cannabis industry or anybody not even in the cannabis industry, for folks that want to educate themselves on what cannabis is, how it can affect you, and realistically what you think is best for you. There is no better site. What can we expect from Leafly in 2021? What can we get excited about that you're allowed to share without getting yelled at by PR or HR there?
That's perfect. There are a lot of really cool things happening at Leafly that I'm really excited about. So a couple of fun things happening right now. Of course, we're doing our celebration of 50 years of 420. So we're digging into those genealogies of the families. So I think we're hitting Hayes family, Tangies, Kush, the Perps, cookies, and cakes. I know a lot of people are going to be like, you didn't say skunk. Skunk influences everything. It's so big. We're going to save skunk for September and do Skunktember. So you guys can look forward to that, to some Skunktember later on. But we're also, we spend a lot of time also doing a lot of work around legalization. And so like, for instance, we issued our jobs report this year. You're going to see some additional reports coming out from us, specifically tackling issues on social equity and other issues. And then you're going to see some evolution happening within our site to help better bring personalization and help you like really be able to tackle some of those questions you have in strains in a more direct way. So there's a lot of product innovation happening on our team right now to make that strains experience a lot richer and help you get that strain you like at a store near you really quickly. So a lot of fun stuff coming, but it's all really focused on helping you understand the cannabis you want, pick the product that's right for you, and get it at the place closest to your house. So that's what we're all about this year.
That is awesome. That's really exciting. And honestly, the more I hear you talk about this and really just the entire conversation, like I feel like we should do this quarterly and just be like, the quarterly weed update, just have you on, tell us what's hot, what's going away, what's popular, all the
I'd
trends.
love to do it.
Sweet.
I'm happy to
Careful
come
what
and
you wish for.
I know, watch out. But you pick a good topic for me. I have a lot of fun talking about strains and what's happening in the world. And we also have a lot of great experts who are much deeper experts than I am, who would blow your mind. So I'm just the spokesperson sometimes.
Well, I'm the spokesperson for Cannabis Lab. They picked the dumbest person in the group to be on camera. So everybody else is a lawyer or a doctor or an executive. I'm like, oh, Todd has free time. We'll put him on camera. So, there's nothing wrong with being the spokesperson. Laura, I've really enjoyed this conversation, like a lot. Let's get all the plugs out there before we let you go, but I'm pretty confident you'll be back.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's been great to have you. So make sure you guys go check out Leafly for all your 420 needs. And we're also giving away the cash for your full stash this year of weed. So there is a weed contest happening for 420 on Leafly as well. So go check that out too.
Very cool. Well, thank you again to Laura, and thank you to everybody at home for joining us today. I love these conversations. I hope you did too. And I hope you learned something today. I hope you had to Leafly, go educate yourself, figure out what works for you, figure out what works for your friends. Just become a better consumer, folks. We're done. If you missed any part of this episode, it will be live on our YouTube page next week at youtube.com/elevateyourgrind, or you can download it in the audio version anywhere that you download your podcast: Apple Music, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeart. I don't think anyone uses the rest of them, but at least those in the majors. You can listen to the audio there. If you want to see all the great stuff that's coming up with C-Lab, you can check that out at joinclab.com, folks. We're done for the week. I get to rest. I'm taking tomorrow off, and we'll be live again here on Tuesday at facebook.com/Cannabis Group with Cody Sanchez. It's been another episode of Elevate Your Grind. We're out.